Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for December 18th, 2023, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hello, welcome everybody to this monstrous conversation.
Monstrous minus one.
Minus one, exactly. As we tackle the latest Japanese-produced Godzilla film. We're a little late to the party here, Brendan, but
I don't know, it still seems top of mind for everyone.
yeah, people are seeing this. Even though we are a few weeks late to this, I went to the theater, and it was pretty packed. Not gonna lie.
I have the box office results just published, I think, about a day ago, and I think we could talk about this as far as what it might mean for American moviegoers craving different content nowadays.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I am curious. So, what are the box office results? You haven't.
So it looks like it has now grossed $34 million domestically. Shooting to a worldwide box office of not quite 60 million, but pretty close to it. I think it's around 57 million, which is interesting because I think the film's budget is 15 million.
Yeah.
Which
Insane.
that is a heck of a result right there. That's incredible. And the fact that this is doing so well on the Western side of things is really incredible. Like it's finding an audience outside of just Japan.
It's also a finalist for Best Visual Effects at this year's Oscars.
Yeah, I can see why. It just goes to show that a movie that could be like $300 million in budget and still look like crap. Money is not going to guarantee a good-looking movie.
Yeah,
right?
Well, maybe we'll talk about that as we get into the review. There's certainly something to be said about that.
Yeah,
for sure. But yeah, it's great to see that this film is doing well. I can't recall if we talked about this on the main show this last week, but I do know that we talked about how, coupled with The Boy and the Heron, but because that's another film that didn't get any marketing here in the United States. Godzilla Minus One might have had a trailer, but there wasn't any heavy push from a marketing perspective.
Yeah,
in the States.
We talked about that. So for those who didn't listen to, that was on Patreon content, if I'm not mistaken.
Was it Patreon?
Or maybe
you might be right. It could have been our.
It was either Patreon content or it was that corresponding main show episode where we talked about box office as it relates to The Boy and the Heron. But I think Godzilla Minus One had a lot of circumstances surrounding it that helped it, given the fact that we have a new Godzilla show on Apple TV. And there was also a trailer for the new Godzilla X Kong movie coming out next year. So Godzilla was certainly top of mind. So with the marketing for those outside properties and moviegoers noticing, oh, there's actually another Godzilla movie in theaters right now. Let's go check that out.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that was the case, but I wouldn't be surprised if it at least helped.
Yeah. So my understanding, I may be a little bit off on this, but I think, and I'm trying to recall, is that Warner Brothers that is doing Godzilla here?
Godzilla X Kong? Yes, I believe that
is that a Warner Brothers franchise?
I'm pretty sure that is a Warner Brothers property.
Okay, so they have the TV show out on Apple Plus. That, I think, was always a complimentary piece to the film franchise.
Yes.
And, of course, they want to get that out now because in a few months, they want people's appetites to still be wet. So when the film comes out, all of it, like that franchise is still top of mind.
Right.
From my understanding with this film, Godzilla Minus One, this is something that Toho Studios was planning to do because the next year is the 100th anniversary, I believe, of, or some sort of major anniversary from when all of this is beginning.
Yes, or at the very least, it's the 70th anniversary of
70th?
Godzilla.
I'm probably wrong on the number, but it's a significant anniversary.
It is, yeah, because that first Godzilla came out in 1954. So we are coming to its 70th anniversary coming next year.
Yeah. So the 70th anniversary. So this was kind of I guess like an appetizer to that, or
Yeah.
a celebration of that. It came out a little early, but it's in celebration of the 70th anniversary.
And as
That's
far as
cool.
I understand, and I think there has been some confusion around this, Godzilla Minus One is not a prequel.
No.
Yeah,
That's
some
because some
some people
some
probably saw
reviews-
minus one. That means
Yeah.
it's a prequel, but that's actually like a war term, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
It's, if anything, we could consider this more of a reboot than anything else, a reinterpretation of the movie that we already know and love.
It's 100% a reinterpretation.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're going to talk about that in the review as well. Yeah, it's funny how some critics have missed that. I don't know how you missed that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's because there's no marketing for this film, but even without that, it just feels
Does it
very
even matter?
apparent.
Yeah, it's
No,
like
yeah,
it
it
does-
just yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I guess to be fair, there are 57 Godzilla films.
That's true.
So
How many of them have
it's
you
hard
even
to
seen?
keep track of. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know, but I think it's quite cogent that this
Yeah.
is a film. Maybe you aren't aware. I certainly didn't when we were talking about this on the main show a week ago, that this was in celebration to the franchise's 70th anniversary.
Mhm.
So, I could understand missing that element of it.
Same,
but I
same.
don't. Other than that, I don't know how you can tie this to anything else.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. All right. So this film, Godzilla Minus One, it is directed by Takashi Yamazaki. It stars Yunosuke Kamiki, Minami Hamabe, and our beloved Sakura Ando.
Sakura
And a
Ando.
bunch of others that come and go
I had
throughout.
no
the
idea she was in this movie.
film. I did not either walking into it, but
Yeah.
there's a bunch of irony that we're going to talk about.
Oh, I'm going to open my thoughts with that.
Yeah. This is post-war Japan, World War II, that is, when they are at their lowest point, when a new crisis emerges in the form of a giant monster baptized in the horrific power of the atomic bomb.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how the film, this is no spoilers, the film just completely overlooks the latter part of that synopsis there. Does not explain Godzilla or how it's born. It's just there. And
I love.
I kind of love that as well. Even if it is a little confusing from a timing perspective, because the film opens and the war isn't technically over yet,
Mm-hmm.
which suggests that the atomic bomb hasn't been dropped at the beginning of this film, and yet Godzilla somehow still exists in this opening scene.
I still have some thoughts around that.
And the locals have a name for it, which is all the more bizarre.
Yeah.
So
I still have some thoughts around that. I think, because that original Godzilla was really more about the atomic bomb itself and the ramifications of that particular weapon. So there was very much a narrative purpose here. It seems as though Godzilla Minus One is going for a more symbolic purpose on the anger that has been initiated because of war, and how that has created this giant ripple effect that just keeps compounding over and over and over again. So you could maybe say Godzilla was born out of war, out of anger.
Yeah.
Again, there's no answer to it, which I love, but I like that the film is at least attempting to give his existence more of a symbolic purpose.
yeah, and I think that is quite vivid.
Yeah.
And I do want to talk about that as we go here as well. I just found the logistics of that a little humorous. However, it's only funny in the context of that synopsis, which might not be accurate. Like whoever wrote that could have been
That's a fair point.
misinterpreting the movie, or they haven't seen it. I think that synopsis, which is pulled from IMDb, was maybe miswrote there. That's my conspiracy theory, because the movie itself,
We need a heat ray to blow it away to rewrite it.
we need an atomic blast to rewrite it.
Yeah.
because the movie itself doesn't establish a formal timeline.
No.
I do love the ambiguity that the creature already exists. And look, the locals have a name for it already. So
Yeah.
they know of its existence. However, the world doesn't. So it's one of those things where
It's like playing with the legacy of it.
it's a little bit of the legacy. I love the ambiguity for sure, but I think there's very much there's an explanation here where Godzilla has just existed or existed for some time before the war even.
He's like the Loch Ness monster for Japan.
A little bit, but
Yeah.
then becomes that symbolic anger and frustration that you're talking about.
Yeah,
think
well,
that
we'll,
might
we'll
be
talk
it.
about that because the way he reciprocates violence and the way he absorbs violence, I think,
Oh,
is
yeah.
very like it's literally symbolic.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, what did you think about Godzilla Minus One?
Oh, it's good. It's really good. I tweeted that I thought I walked into the new Hirokazu Koreeda film by mistake, and it's only coincidental because his film is called Monster. I thought he may have accidentally made a monster movie by mistake or something like that. And the fact that you've got the great Sakura Ando in both of these movies. I had no idea she was even in this one. And when she showed up, not only was I immediately thinking of Hirokazu Koreeda and the great performance she gave in Shoplifters, which admittedly, I actually think that was probably the best performance of that year, the more I think about it.
It's so good.
It's so good. And she's really good here, but she's not the focus. But the reason why I bring up Hirokazu Koreeda is it's pretty much the reason why I think this film has been so positively reviewed and responded so warmly by pretty much everyone who's going to see it, because it actually has a heart to it. It's something that really it's a movie that has substance around what it means for Japan in this post-war environment and the way they were almost kind of taken advantage of and utilized by both the American and Japanese governments, and the ramifications of not just them as a nation but also kamikaze pilots. And as a result of that, you have this like makeshift family that sort of forms, which is such a Koreeda thing. Like that is the Koreeda blueprint.
Very Koreeda.
Yeah. So when that, and then that's like in the first third of the movie, you kind of get this makeshift family that forms, that finds each other, and they have to learn to be a family. And one has to learn to battle his cowardice and newfound heroism as a result of that. Like thematically speaking, the foundational support of this movie from a human level is very Hirokazu Koreeda. Like it's almost like he was a consultant on this movie.
Yeah.
But not to be fair, I don't like this movie because it reminds me of what I love about Hirokazu Koreeda. I like this film because it takes itself seriously in a way that most blockbusters just don't do anymore. And I think that's why it's being so positively reviewed, but also doing well enough at the box office to sustain that. It proves that I think audiences are craving content that actually has not necessarily substance, but that has passion and warmth and joy and sadness that actually make you feel something nowadays, that really give you something to really latch onto as opposed to something visual, right? And that's why I think this film is kind of a special thing. I think as a monster movie, it's really thrilling, or specifically as a kaiju movie, if we want to be a bit more technical with the term. But it's also just as great as a war drama. Like as a war drama, it's almost just as good, if not even better. And that's what I think is so great about the film.
Man, I am with you. This film is awesome.
Yeah.
It is so
hype is
good.
actually real. I was very skeptical going into it
Yeah.
because I thought the hype would kind of ruin it for me.
Yeah, no, it's really good. And as we alluded to there a few moments ago, it quintessentially demonstrates how modern blockbusters can be a giant epic with mesmerizing characters and themes, all without spending $200 million. What this
15 million,
film is
dude.
able to accomplish
15.
on a stupidly low budget is so remarkably insane. It is hard to wrap your brain around.
It's amazing.
It's so good, but like as a spectacle, it is really engrossing. The action is enthralling, and not just because it features the Japanese Kushu J7W Shinden, which I know is the real reason you're all tuning in for, to hear me talk about this prototype. And yes, it was real. It was an interceptor designed to combat the US B-29 Flying Superfortress. Only 2 of them were ever built. It never saw combat. And only one of them was saved. The one that we see in this film, interestingly though, is a full-scale replica that Toho Studios had made for the film, which I think is really cool. At any rate, the action is great. Shingen and all.
JD, you're such a nerd.
I know, I can't
But it's
help
like, okay,
myself.
like you have that. I do the same thing with bass guitars, right? And you probably think I'm talking another language or something. So we all have those nerdy ins that we love.
Yeah,
I get it.
Look, I love it. This film certainly tapped into my nerdisms in that regard for sure. But yeah, I do love the action here. The city destruction is viscerally thrilling. The explosions are palpable. Godzilla is a crazed lunatic terrorist, which is a compelling juxtaposition to how he's been depicted in many of these films, especially the US versions. And while narratively the broad plot lines here are pretty conventional, this is unquestionably the most sobering Japanese produced Godzilla film since the original. And nothing against the extravagant, fun-driven monster bashes.
No.
But the way that original threads the needle between action epic and devastating commentary is why it's one of the best films of its time. And this film is aiming for something similar in how human-centric it is with its tone and storytelling.
Right.
At the risk of sounding myopic, since I'm obviously not Japanese, but the way it wrestles with the fundamental idea of kamikaze and the failure of the Japanese Navy and Air Force, I think is really interesting. And that's the central internal conflict for our main character here and Shikishima. All while at the same time, as you're talking about there, Brennan, it is very apparent that Hirokazu Koreeda ghost wrote the family dynamic stuff because it's equally spellbinding in how we see this surrogate family come together as a result of the war. And yes, it stars Sakura Ando. You can't help but make those connections. She gave an Oscar-worthy performance in Shoplifters. I agree. She's great in Monster. We'll get to that here soon. So there is a direct connection there, which makes it all the more apparent and vivid. But all joking aside, this is how blockbuster should be made. Great action, great characters, thematic undercurrent, incredible score, and not just how it invokes the original, but on its own terms. The original score here is also really, really great. Yeah, this is the blueprint. This is how it should be done.
Yeah, and the fact that you said this is perhaps the closest that a Godzilla film has come to mirroring that original from 1954, that is apparent, and it probably makes more sense that that's the case, considering that this is the 70th anniversary celebration that they're using this film for.
Exactly.
It's almost like what they're trying to do is make a film that goes back to those roots.
It's
right?
It's trying to honor that exactly.
Yeah. And I don't think this is even a hot take to say, but that first Godzilla from 1954 and this one are probably the 2 best Godzilla movies ever made.
Yeah,
honestly.
Shocking.
Yeah. Like, there's a lot I haven't seen. Like, I mean, as a kid, I had fun with, like Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla and things like that. But
nothing against the extravagance of the kaiju monster bashes.
Right.
There's fun to be had.
Yeah.
But there's a reason that the original is held in high regard, and there's a reason that this film is being held in a high regard.
Because it's actually a movie. Yeah.
Yes.
It gets like those other Godzilla movies from the 1970s or whenever they all came out, they were basically like monster Power Rangers movies. It's basically what they turned into. And they're fun. They're fun for what they are. And I've mostly enjoyed some of the Americanized versions of Godzilla as of late. The MonsterVerse it's fine. I admittedly kind of mess with Roland Emmerich's film from 1998. It is not good, but it's a nostalgic blinder for me.
There's the nostalgia part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was in middle school when that film came out. Like I was to
I was
enjoy
8.
something like that.
I was 8 or 9. I thought the marketing for that movie is really what made it. Like the whole mystery of what the creature was going to look like. It was sort of like this mystery box thing before it was ever really a thing. After Cloverfield kind of capitalized on it, 10 years later?
I will forever think of Taco Bell. they
Oh
capitalized
gosh.
immensely on the
Oh,
whole
that time
Godzilla craze of that film.
when fast food restaurants capitalized on blockbuster
I know.
entertainment. I love that.
It used to
Uh,
be a standard. It's gone away. It's really sad.
yeah, but you make great points as to what makes Godzilla minus one so enthralling, and it is both the thematic and human element underneath the monster movie that it ultimately is. It's not just the family dynamics that are so powerful and so wonderful to watch, and the performances are so great in mirroring that dynamic as well. That idea of cowardice from kamikaze pilots who simply chose to live, does that mean they failed their nation? And
Mhm.
that's a really interesting and ironic concept. As you talked about, Japan essentially failed as a country with regard to World War II, right?
Yep.
So, and they're feeling that. And this movie and Godzilla himself, or itself rather, is sort of this conduit for Japan to feel some sense of camaraderie and togetherness and success as a nation. It's their way of coming together in some way, which is what I think is so powerful about those final moments. The final battle here against Godzilla. Not only is it enthralling as an action film, but the mechanics and how they try and trap him, they actually kind of make sense.
Yeah.
Like
No, I have some thoughts on that too. Yeah.
I'm not going to say the science is accurate because I don't work in that profession to know for sure. But as a moviegoer, as someone that's trying to understand it at a high level, like it's a very clever way to try and trap him. Like I
Mhm.
thought that was really interesting, and just the sheer mechanics of the aerial combat scenes, the actual the water scenes themselves, I think are just thrilling from a filmmaking standpoint.
Yeah.
So a lot of credit also has to go to director Takashi Yamazaki. I don't really know his work, but I think he directs the hell out of this movie.
Yeah, he does. And I certainly want to talk about the science and how all of that crystallizes at the end. But to circle back to what you're saying about the fundamental thematic crux of this film as it relates to the war and even more specifically the idea of kamikaze, that is such a captivating idea for this film
Mhm.
to wrestle with because on one hand, from a broad human perspective, it's easy to understand Koichi's reservations.
Yeah.
His choice to land on Odo Island at the beginning of this film, this island that is specifically noted to be where kamikaze pilots land
Yeah.
to have their planes be fixed. So if there's something wrong with the plane, they land there. That's what we see at the beginning of this film,
Mhm.
which tethers to his reservations. And it's very understandable that he makes
Sure.
that choice, even if that renders him a coward under Japan's honor code and kamikaze ethos. But
Mhm.
then, given how that opening bout plays out, it then goes on to evoke a sense of survival guilt to compound on his
Yeah.
lack of conviction. There's a really compelling moment when he first gets back to Tokyo and he sees that it's all been burned to the ground. And seeing that devastation alone is going to have an impact.
Oh,
But
sure.
then he bumps into the Sakura Ando character of Sumiko, who berates him for coming home because
Yeah.
one, he's a
He was
kamikaze
he's not
pilot
supposed
and
to
should
come
have
home.
died committing to the code, and two, as you were alluding to, for being a failure and losing the war,
Yeah.
implying that all of this carnage could have been avoided if they were victorious. An
Yeah.
idea that is further examined when a character, I'm struggling to recall which one it was, it might have been the Yoji character, talking to
Okay.
Kochi about how the government just didn't train personnel properly or make the
No.
greatest weapons comparatively to the US. In fact, I think one of them invokes specifically how their planes and tanks were inadequate, which is
Yeah.
so fascinating to me because going back to my nerddom, there is a truth to that. For
Mhm.
as great as the Japanese Zero was, it was easy to shoot down. It
Yeah.
had no self-sealing fuel tanks. It was lightly armored. It was fast and can maneuver like the wind, but it didn't take much to down it. And
Mhm.
as was the case with a lot of Japanese aircraft. So to see this film wrestle with that and not just as a broad ideology, but how it specifically impacts these characters emotionally is spellbinding to me.
Yeah.
Because that is foundational to these characters, especially the Kochi character. He feels guilty for being a failed kamikaze and letting those men down on Odo Island. And every choice he makes in this film is all about remedying his failures. And
Yeah.
it's affecting.
Yeah, and ultimately that question of what it means to even survive and whether there's honor in even surviving and how you go about doing that. And then that goes back to Japan as a nation still being able to thrive as a nation of togetherness. And this is why I think the lack of exposition telling us where Godzilla came from is really interesting in this movie.
Sure.
That because you can almost sense that his existence came out of, in many ways, came out of anger for Japan being such a failed nation at this point, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like that anger that Japanese people held because of how they felt failed by their own government almost manifested this creature. And he's the manifestation of all that. It's why whenever he's attacked, you notice he gets even bigger. Like he actually grows and like he symbolically absorbs violence against him, which is very symbolic and very deliberate. So he like it almost makes him less of a creature or a terrorist, as you said, and more of like a demon, right?
He's a raging, maniacal, carnage creating kaiju. He really is a terrorist.
And this is why it goes back to the original in a lot of ways, because this is a creature that you're meant to fear. Even in a lot of the Americanized versions of this monster, when he's a threat to whatever city he's demolishing, a lot of times they go out of the way to make him kind of respectful.
He's an anti-hero.
Yeah, which is,
a lot of the time he's depicted as an anti-hero,
which is not a bad thing.
This film.
Yeah, which is not a bad thing. I think
agree.
in some cases it works for those movies, and other cases it doesn't. But in this case, he's not that. He is 1000% a demon that's meant to be battled against. But as that, he is frightening. Like there are some truly frightening sequences here, and a lot of it is the way it's directed, but a lot of it's also the sound. The sound editing and mixing here is astounding to really amplify the grandness of this creature.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think the symbolic fortitude behind him, the anger he conveys, and what it represents as it relates to either Japan's frustrations over losing the war and the carnage that was reaped upon them as a result of that, or maybe it could be symbolic of the atomic nature of the war itself, because this is an atomic creature, right? One that wreaks havoc through his atomic breath. And there are a few times here where he creates his own nuclear explosions.
Oh yeah.
So
the heat ray.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's an element of him being a symbolic image of the nuclear aspect of the war. It might not even be that they lost. It certainly could be that, but I do think there's an interpretation here that that's what it is. Because that's what he creates, and he goes on to create Godzilla-esque carnage, as we see in the Ginza sequence, with the train, buildings being toppled over, and then we get the explosion there at the end of it, which is so propulsive. But it's also indicative in the sequence there out in open waters where he just completely obliterates a U.S. Navy vessel.
That's amazing.
Which is a visceral moment in this film. And
much of the fighting has to take place between Godzilla and this one wooden boat.
Yeah, which is hilarious. Honestly, it's a fun little diverting moment. And I do want to talk about that here as well. For as human-centric as it is, the tone of this film is certainly going for more of a gravitas than flamboyance. But there is a fun energy here as well.
Yeah.
And there is something humorous about this giant Godzilla that is representative, symbolic of something frustrating, something that's angry. And of course, it's symbolic of the heart-wrenching ramifications that come with the atomic age,
Yeah.
that is chasing this tiny little wooden boat out in the ocean.
lo-
You know, and all they have is a little gun.
Almost like there's a bit of a Jaws-like energy to it.
Yeah,
and
there's
I-
something kind of funny about that.
Well, yeah, but I mostly say that because the camaraderie between those on the boat, not just Kochi himself, and I do love Kamiki's performance there, but the camaraderie has with the captain of Yoji, played by, I'm going to butcher these names, but I at least want to give credit where credit is due. Kuronosuke Sasaki, I believe the captain's name is, and many of the others here. It's the second that they're all introduced, like within mere seconds, like I said, you get this energy that it's like, oh, this is going to be fun. I'm going to like these people. Okay, this movie's in good hands. Like it doesn't take very long to establish that sense of camaraderie that you're going to enjoy seeing these people on screen. So like even despite the gravitas that we're talking about, this is a very fun movie. Not funny, but it's a very fun movie as a blockbuster like this should be, and it gets that balance right.
I agree, and that's what I love about the moment of Godzilla chasing this wooden boat, because it's the irony of this giant creature and what he is symbolic of.
Yeah.
Just chasing this tiny little wooden boat that has no chance to defeat Godzilla whatsoever. The film itself is not invoking laughter through that sequence. In fact, if anything, it's the antithesis. It's this moment of danger.
Yeah.
There's certainly a diverting energy with some of the camaraderie. I do agree there. But the sequence itself, it's this chase sequence that has, you know, more of a thrilling energy to it than anything else, or at least it's, you know, trying to evoke some sort of sense of tension, especially given what we had just seen with how Godzilla had destroyed that giant U.S. naval ship. But yeah, the image itself, the irony of it just happens to be a little funny. And I do think that the film is aware of that. It's not winking necessarily, but kind of aware of it.
It does. Well, isn't that the moment where I mentioned the captain, the character of Yuji, says something like, "No, we commit to the mission. We got to commit to the mission." And then Godzilla comes and destroys that naval ship. He goes, like, "Okay, never mind.
We're out of here." Which is how someone should respond at that moment.
Yeah. But like the film is aware of that potential humor. Like it is a little tongue in cheek with that at times. But again, like a movie like this should be. It should know how to balance those diverting tones to create something so singular, which is why director here, Takashi Yamazaki, needs to be credited for being able to do that. It feels like such a breath of fresh air for what blockbuster filmmaking should be nowadays.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the direction of this film, especially when it comes to Godzilla and the havoc that he wreaks. I mean, we noted earlier that this is on the short list for best visual effects, and for good reason. The effects here are great.
Really good.
The cinematography is very good. The sound design of this film is excellent. The character work, the storytelling is really fantastic. My only criticism of this film, and this somewhat comes down to Yamazaki's direction, specifically tone management, and some of these performances, because I don't always love Kamiki's performance.
Okay,
now,
fair.
Don't get me wrong, he is good here. I do think at times, though, he would be wonderful in a Todd Haynes movie. Would be wonderful. You know, this is a film that it tonally is hearkening back to the original, and it's tackling some hefty ideas, especially for a popcorn blockbuster that is taking itself seriously. The melodrama he conveys at times, in contrast to that, I do think feels a little out of place, but it's not just him. It's also Yuki Yamada at times. It's Sasaki as well. And even, God love her, Sakura Ando as well. She's a little flamboyant at times, at least early on. And I get it. As we've been talking about, this film is trying to have fun and have a diverting energy, especially with all of its carnage that we see. It's understandable the film would do that.
Right.
I mean, this is There's a moment in this film where reporters are on top of a building as
I
Godzilla
loved it. That
is
was
wreaking
amazing.
havoc, literally right in front of them. It's
I
silly.
guess
It's
I guess
very
that's
silly.
yeah.
I just don't know if those clashing tones always work. And more than anything, because the film is so character centric with a
Mhm.
great thematic backbone to elevate them, the melodrama and the performances did take me out a little bit.
Okay.
As much as yeah, so like that's really my only little nitpick here. I didn't always love that, but on the whole, the way the film and the performances kind of bring you into its central conflict,
Yeah.
it's good. It is good.
Yeah. Admittedly, I didn't really mind the melodrama all that much, or at least the heightened drama with regard to some of those performances and some of those moments, because I at least appreciated that the film was going for all of those things. Because we don't often see that. And is it as successful as it should be? Arguable, debatable, right? As consistent as it should be at the very least. Because you have some performances here that are trying to do all of those things, maybe a few other performances that are really honing in on only that melodrama, or you have a performance like uh, Minami Hamabe as Noriko, who's really the most dramatically grounded performance in the entire film. So I guess I didn't mind it
Yeah.
because I feel like each performance is working for their own individual compartmentalized portion of the film. But at the same time, I don't necessarily disagree that it's a little wobbly in totality and getting
Yeah.
from all of those different points. But I at least admired the conviction. You know, the fact that
Yeah.
it's not it's not trying to play it safe. Like
Yeah.
that scene with the reporters, it feels so out of place,
Yeah.
and yet I love that it's here. Like,
Well,
it's
and that's
so
why I
interesting.
want to qualify that the fun, the playfulness,
Mhm.
I don't have an issue with. I had
Sure.
fun with moments like that, or the aforementioned irony of this huge kaiju going after this tiny little wooden boat, and even
Mhm.
some of the dialogue, not just in that moment, but throughout a lot of this film, like there is a playfulness to it at times,
Right.
and I don't mind that because the film picks the right moments for it to be playful.
Mhm.
I don't have an issue with that at all. In fact,
Sure.
if the film wanted to do more of that, I would have embraced it and welcomed it. But I think it's well timed. My issue really is with the melodrama.
That's fair.
That's where I think the film tonally loses itself a little bit. It just doesn't gel with either the playfulness or the more serious tone that it has when it comes to its emotion and thematic ideas when it comes
Mhm.
to the kamikaze stuff.
Mhm.
I think it overcooks it a little bit in that regard.
Okay.
I like the ideas. Honestly, what's there on paper, I don't have an issue with. I think it's
Sure.
strictly an execution thing
Mhm.
because the writing, I think, is actually pretty great.
I agree.
There's moments here where Koichi is really wrestling with Noriko as far as their relationship, what it really means. And then when there's a dramatic turn, he has to really look deep within himself because now there's an extra element. He's already suffering from survival's guilt from Odo Island. He's already suffering from his lack of conviction as it relates to being a kamikaze. And then this dramatic turn happens halfway through the film where another character is disposed as a result of his actions. So
Yeah.
there's this guilt that just compounds itself one after another. The layers of that are really great. I love the writing of it. I just think at times Kamiki, as he's trying to convey that internal conflict, it goes from I guess grounded, emotional, uh, uh, kind of character driven
Yeah. I see. I know what you mean.
motivations
Yeah.
to something that is a little too outlandish for a film that wasn't aiming
Yeah,
for that at all.
I will say I do think Kamiki is better in those quiet moments, especially when he's sharing those moments with other characters. I love the camaraderie he has with the Tachibana character who returns back into the narrative after that beginning
Oh yeah, that's
sequence
great.
on the island.
Yeah, I love all
Yeah,
that.
and I love that performance there from Munitaka Aoki. In fact, he might be my second favorite performance in the entire
Oh my
film.
god, so good. And that's what I mean. Like, there's nothing melodramatic about that dynamic.
Yeah.
Like, that's really great. Or the conversations that Koichi has. Is it the Kenji character? Which one is the naval scientist? I'm trying to recall
The
here.
naval scientist. Yes, that is
Is it
Kenji Noda, played by
Yeah.
Hidetaki Yoshioki.
Yeah,
Again,
love
butchering those
that.
names. I apologize. I
Yeah.
really do.
We're
But
trying here. But like, that dynamic is also great because, again, it's grounded. It's rooted in, this tangible emotion that we sense in both of those characters. Because it's not just Koichi that's suffering from survival's guilt. It's all of these
It's all of
characters
them.
in some ways, right? I mean, that's how dramatically, from a plotting perspective, the citizens of Ginsu kind of rally is, hey, we lost the war, but here's a way we can remedy that.
Yeah.
And we're going to attack this symbol of devastation that, completely murdered, thousands of people in our country.
Yeah.
So like, again, like tapping into that to symbolically fight against the carnage that was against them. I love all of that on paper. And again, there's nothing melodramatic about that. Like, all of that is effective. It's great. It's just fantastic. So like, those moments of sometimes it's high end melodrama, it sticks out like a sore thumb because the rest of the film just doesn't function that way at all.
And I think at the same time too, that could be part of the Japanese culture when it comes to movies like this.
Sure.
And that's, again, it's just different audiences perceiving it in different ways, which is why it's hard to say it as a criticism. But at the same time, it's not something we're used to. It could be something that they're very much used to overseas. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, I certainly get it. If I had any criticisms of the film, it's not really a criticism because the movie still works even with this knowledge offhand. But the movie is very predictable where it's going to end up, right? Like if you see
it's
movies,
conventional from a
it's very conventional.
broad plotting.
Yeah, and that's not a bad thing because I was still
No.
moved by it, regardless of where it was
Yeah.
going to end up.
Yep.
But it does have a few surprises up its sleeve that I think it tries to play off as surprises. One involving the plane that I won't give away.
Yeah.
But even
love
before it
that.
gives that away, it's like, okay, I loved it, but at the same time, I knew it was coming. Because there are little bits of foreshadowing that are making the audience think, oh, wait, there's something about this plane that they're choosing not to reveal to us that we're going to find out later. I bet it's going to be blank. And that ended up being the case. So it's highly conventional. It's very broad in that way. Not a bad thing, but I feel like if it's playing up those surprises as if to be some kind of surprise, I wish I was a little bit surprised in the moment, if that makes sense.
No, I completely agree. Like, yeah, I mean, where this is going to go. And from an execution perspective, I think it plays that sleight of hand
fairly
with
well.
the Shinden actually quite well. No, all of that is great. And to circle back to what you were saying about the cultural disparity and how audiences might perceive this, that is something I thought about. And again, perhaps it's at play here. Even if that is the case, I still wonder about consistency.
That's fair.
Because, again, so much of this film lacks melodrama. It's taking itself seriously. And that grounded approach, for all the reasons we're talking about, is so effective.
Yeah.
And it's really great. So, and again, the playfulness is wonderful. I like that. So I just wonder about the consistency of the film in that regard. That would be my pushback against even the cultural disparity and how one might receive the melodrama here. But yeah, in terms of how things play out, I mean, yeah, and as I talked about in my opening thoughts, I mean, where this is going to end up, but getting from A to Z, it's incredibly engaging cinematically. It's thrilling at times, and I do think it plays its sleight of hands extremely well. Yeah, I love that moment there, with the Shinden, and because again, it circles back to the Koichi character and all of these things he's been wrestling with that we've been talking about, and that is such at play in such a big way in these final moments. that, I guess without getting into spoilers, like it really taps into it, subverts it in a way. It all
Yeah.
circles back to this family dynamic as well. And maybe that could be another small nitpick I have with the film, as much as I love the
That's fair.
Correa surrogate family stuff here.
Yeah.
It really isn't that big of a thing for the Koichi character. Like, at least the film doesn't devote a lot of time to it. It's really more so the other stuff. We do get some conflict between Koichi and the Noriko character.
Yeah.
But as far as the little girl goes, he might have one moment with her early on in the film. It's endearing. You know, that moment when he tucks her in at night before he goes off to the final battle. It's endearing, but those are like, there's really not a lot of time devoted to it. But I still think it works because of the execution.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Who would have thought that a movie like this, a Godzilla movie, would be among the better movies of the year? In a year that is already this stacked.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
No, it's fantastic. And some of the other things, I guess my final thought, if we're gonna get into that, circling back to Koichi's survival skill.
Yeah.
So one little detail that I love about this is that he has all of these photos from the dead soldiers from Odo.
Oh, yeah, and he
Island.
just carries it with him.
Carries it with him. It speaks to how personal a lot of this is for him.
Yeah.
And him willing to commit at the end. You know, it's interesting because, again, there's a sleight of hand, so I don't want to get into details. But when he climbs into that cockpit of the Shinden at the end, he was committing to his convictions. It's not until the sleight of hand is at play where that changed for him. And it's a conversation that takes place once he's already in the cockpit. So and again, I love how the film reveals it.
Yeah.
To me, that's where the surrogate family stuff might be the impact, or at least where the execution, I think, is great. Even if it doesn't devote as much time to it as it could have from Koichi's point of view, I still like how it taps into it with his convictions there in the end.
Sure.
It's great. And then, of course, there's a final reveal that just makes it all the more blockbustery.
Again, kind of saw it coming, and I have questions about how it works. But
1,000% you see it coming.
like, there's no way that would work in real life, but at the same time, I didn't care.
Yeah, who cares? Yeah. No, and to your point earlier about the final battle of the film, I love how they use science to combat Godzilla. It's not traditional weaponry because, as you noted, it absorbs violence. It loves the use of weaponry. It takes all of that in. So they have to do something different, and instead they use science. And again, I also don't know. That's where my World War II nerdum, I don't know. Like, I don't know about that science. That's not my forte. That doesn't have to do with the air war. So I don't know. Don't know. But, I bought it. It sounded fun to me. It sounded good.
Oh,
they did a great job of selling it.
Yeah.
So,
Japan's on a roll. Japan's on a roll this year with films. They really are.
Absolutely. Do you have any other final thoughts on Godzilla Minus One? Should we talk about the score?
We mentioned it, so we can mention it again that the score is wonderful. The score is absolutely amazing. I don't have IMDb pulled up once again, so I wanted to give credit where credit is due. Do you have it open to at least acknowledge who the composer is?
It is, oh boy, again, forgive me, I don't know how to say this. Nakai Sato.
Okay. If we butchered that, we apologize,
but
we at least want to acknowledge the names that deserve to be recognized.
The score is great. The original stuff here. Now, it does invoke that original iconic theme.
Yeah, but it's pretty cryptic about it. Like if you know the movie very well, you'll notice it. But if you don't know that movie, you'll just think it's interwoven within the actual score and not even pick up on that, which is smartly done.
I agree, and I like not just the placement of it, but the timing of the rhythm. So because when he's in wreaking havoc on Ginzu, it's there, but the beat to it is a little slower paced, and I think that's a great way to do it because it's this highly dramatic moment, right, where this monster is just causing all kinds of carnage.
Yeah.
So to use that theme in a more dramatic sense, I think is appropriate. And then it comes back in that final battle where things escalate to a point where the energy is a little bit more rambunctious.
Yeah.
And that's when the theme really kicks in. And if you're a fan of this music at all, your hairs on the back of your neck will stand up.
Yep.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll love the fan service there. Fan service done right.
It's great. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Good movie.
Yeah.
Surprising, but great movie.
Good stuff. And yeah, the original score around that is still really, really good as well.
Agreed.
Really
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like this a lot. Definitely encourage you to go and check it out if you haven't already. It's still in theaters. Hopefully it is this weekend still. Seems to be doing
I think
well at the box office.
I think it will be.
Yeah. So a film that not only features Godzilla, but also wrestles with post-World War II failures. I mean, not many blockbusters are choosing to do that. Not many. This one does.
Yeah.
It's very good.
That's
Unreal.
amazing. Absolutely
Unreal.
amazing.
Yeah. Very effective in that regard. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, please let us know. Hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can email us insessionfilm@gmail.com. If you're watching us here on YouTube, you can leave a comment below. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, all that fun stuff. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please rate and review us. It really helps out the show quite a lot when you're able to do that. We really want to get the show out there, so we would really appreciate that. Anything else, Brendan, before we get out of here?
Godzilla. That's it.
Okay, fair enough. I think that is a good final thought.
I'm tired, man. That's the only thing I had on my mind. Good movie. See this. See it.
It's good. Yeah, very, very good. Surprising. Again, one of those movies. This is why we have Best Surprise Movie at the In Session Film Awards.
Yeah.
For films like this.
For reasons like this. Absolutely.
Exactly. So, all right. Well, with all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Oh, man, it was fun seeing the Shindig. Full-scale replica for this film.
Hashtag nerd.